Suppose we have a statement. Is it based on or influenced by personal feelings, tastes, views, or judgments? If yes, it is subjective. If no, it is objective. Sounds simple enough, but as you might be aware, this is a contentious topic that ominously lingers in the background of many discussions. Chances are you've heard at least one of the following statements. In a purely subjective conversation, each person would share how they felt, and that would be it. In a purely objective review, you could only state things like the release date and names of the actors. That would be boring. What you felt about it is irrelevant to the quality of the craft. It's impossible to judge whether a work is objectively good or bad, it's always just your opinion. Facts don't care about your feelings. You're pretending to not be a flawed human. The topic often evokes strong emotional responses, as it is important and touches on very fundamental questions. When I was first introduced to the subject, the objective side was closer to my heart, and I didn't really understand how something so seemingly straightforward can generate such a heated conflict. Since then, I thought about it a lot more, and while I in no way claim to have the perfect or final take, I nevertheless would like to share what I think. Attention! This topic is quite philosophical. We'll be touching on the nature of reality and perception. If that sounds too autistic, consider the magnitude of autism required to get to this point without a train. Speaking of trains, to avoid going off the rails into a void of infinitely recursive questions, I will be making 3 practical assumptions. Examining whether they are philosophically true is outside the scope of this video. Assumption 1. We inhabit a shared reality. For practical, everyday purposes, reality exists and behaves predictably enough. Actions you don't even think about have expected results that you also don't think about. You walk from point A to point B, and the ground doesn't randomly lose all friction or collision. No matter your philosophical stance on the issue, everyone acts like it's true on the daily. Assumption 2. One only has access to one's perception of reality. We perceive through our senses and process perceived information with our brains. Both perception and processing are physically limited, and we lack a way to directly share either with any other person. Assumption 3. One chooses one's own values. In practice, it's obvious that people differ in what they value. For any given value, you will find at least one human somewhere that disagrees with it. Even broadly agreeable statements like human life is valuable lead to significant divergence on the specifics. No matter how great your arguments, you can't argue with someone that places no value in argumentation. When both sides of a values dispute refuse to budge, there's nothing to refer to that wouldn't allow for a similar stalemate, save for divine intervention. There's no universal and questionable reference point that practically can't be rejected by someone that doesn't believe in it. Closely related to those assumptions is the process of communication, and in that, the concept of language. Our perception and our values can be expressed in reality in a way that another person can observe and internalize. Self-evidently, communication is possible, which means ideas must have a degree of independence from any particular person's feelings, tastes, views, or judgments, or else they couldn't be shared. This, I believe, is where objectivity comes from. By definition, anything at all influenced by the personal is subjective. Per assumption 2, we have no way to cleanly and fully insulate our thinking from what's personal to us. It all takes place in the same brain. In practice, however, we can formulate and express ideas that are independent enough from the personal for a given purpose. Objectivity, therefore, operates on the idea of good enough. Deviations from perfection don't prevent a machine from functioning, provided the difference is within tolerance. Similarly, I have no idea what the color we call red looks like to you. The way you perceive it might be the way I perceive green. There's no way to know. Despite that, I can paint a wall red, and you can look at that wall and agree that it is read. Our understanding is good enough for the purpose, and thus the wall is objectively read. This way of looking at the relationship between subjectivity and objectivity doesn't frame them as opposite or conflicting, and certainly doesn't imply a better and worse side. It's a complementary duality, a description of phenomena that naturally arise from distinct people sharing one reality. Objectivity is based around good enough for the purpose, so distinguishing it from subjectivity hinges on that purpose. The purpose is dependent on the values of the people participating in the conversation, and per assumption 3, there is no guarantee that those values are shared. Without that guarantee, and considering people rarely lay out their whole value framework on the table before getting into a subject, how do conversations even happen? Well, some thoughts. We most often talk with people that share a huge chunk of our values, to the point where a lot of people assume their values are universal. We also implicitly show our values through what we choose to talk about and how. We are also very good at intuitively picking up on those values. But perhaps most importantly, we talk past each other more than we realize, and we rarely engage deep enough to hit value differences, especially since doing so is quite uncomfortable. Language having shared meaning does not preclude words from being misused or misunderstood. You understood the words correctly according to their definitions, but your interlocutor meant something else. According to the dictionary, your word choice was perfect, but your interlocutor understood something else. Context, nonverbal cues, and other information influences how a theoretically clear message actually comes across. This by no means suggests that precision is pointless or that definitions don't matter, but it highlights the importance of considering whether the words you use have a meaning shared enough for the purpose of communicating with the person you're talking to. Let's apply this carefulness in approach to the main topic. According to the dictionary, objective are statements not based on nor influenced by personal feelings, tastes, views, or judgments. Suppose Bob calls the Mona Lisa an objectively good painting. What did Bob mean by this? Well, here's some possibilities. It is competently painted. The painter achieved what he set out to do. The Mona Lisa is one of the most famous and valued paintings in the world. Everyone likes the Mona Lisa. Maybe all of the above. Maybe he meant something completely different. Maybe Bob didn't think about what he said at all. There is an objective dictionary definition of the word objective. However, what Bob specifically meant when he used the word is, without access to Bob's head, somewhat unknown. Additional information is needed to extract a meaning independent enough from Bob's head to be understood by others, to derive objective enough meaning from a subjective statement. When every participant shares an understanding of the topic, responses can be formulated and the discussion can be fruitful. Consider instead if each participant simply assumed what Bob meant and responded to that. There's no guarantee that everyone assumes the same meaning, much less the correct meaning. Bob is now on the defensive, having to clarify that he didn't mean what he never said. Other participants start arguing with each other, more unstated assumptions are made on top of the initial ones about Bob's sentence, the discussion no longer has a direction or goal, and chaotically continues until it naturally fizzles out. Most participants are left feeling unfulfilled. You've likely been in situations like this, in Bob's position or otherwise. It's kind of a staple of internet discussions, but it sure happens in real life too. People frequently speak for the sake of speaking, without a goal or really any intentionality. You might assume that a response indicates someone's interest in what you said, that someone is often just interested in responding. Such engagement feels empty. Your only importance was the opportunity to speak you've provided. Does this mean you're owed deeper engagement? No. Does it mean you should try to engage deeply with everyone you interact with? Well, maybe. Who is worth deeply engaging with? Is there a point in engaging if it won't be deep? I don't think there's a universal answer, but it's sure worth thinking about. Sometimes people use subjective and objective to indicate what they want to talk about. Interest in a subjective discussion roughly translates to I want to explore how I am or how something affects me and others. Interest in an objective discussion roughly translates to I want to explore the thing itself, describe it, and look for patterns. These two aspects are not separated with a hard line. It's common to describe how you feel and then look for what made you feel that way. It's also common to notice good decisions and remark about feeling positively in response to them, or point out problems and how they negatively affect you. While true and false are often associated with objectivity, statements about the personal can be accurate or inaccurate, and thus true or false. It's entirely possible for outside observers to make more accurate judgments about a person than the person's self-judgment. Whether through sharing personal matters with others or attempting to look at ourselves from an outside perspective, we benefit from objectivization of the subjective. A concept that exemplifies this well is revealed preference, which suggests that what someone chooses to do says more about what they actually want than what they declare, also known as actions speak louder than words, and not just the actions of others but also your own. If you claim to believe something, but your actions don't reflect that, perhaps it's a good idea to examine what that belief actually means to you. Words have meaning when they accurately reflect reality, and thus, if you want meaningful conversations, you should closely examine whether your stated preferences align with your actions. If you see misalignment, maybe you should change what you say, what you do, or both. The relationship between what we have inside and how we act on the outside isn't one-directional, it's cyclical. Our internal state affects how we behave, and the way we behave in turn influences our internal state. Subjective is often misused as a replacement for unimportant or undisputable. Responding to someone's point with, "It's just your opinion," implies that you do not value said opinion. Defending your statements with, "Let me have my opinion," implies that you do not value what someone has to say in response. For discussion to not be a monologue, I must want to know what you think, and you must want to know what I think. Technically, anything anyone says is just their opinion. However, entering into a discussion carries with it an implicit agreement for mutual respect. Reducing someone's thoughts to just their opinion violates that fundamental agreement, and so does acting like responses to your thoughts are beneath you. Insisting upon either or both effectively ends any hope for a productive engagement. Objective, on the other hand, is often misused as a replacement for very or obviously. Objectively good is often meant as so good that no reasonable person would disagree. To actually make the judgment objective, a shared standard for what good means needs to be provided. Without one, the statement is basically meaningless. Objective discussions, however, rarely stop at just declaring something good, bad, or 7 out of 10. The shared standard gets clarified and described throughout the conversation. If it's done well, at the end of the engagement, all participants understand what objectively good actually means in this particular case. The person starting the discussion might have meant something very different than what emerged at the end, but the end result, whatever it may be, is shared, and thus no longer only about the conversation starter. Through many such discussions, individual and collective knowledge is built. There are tremendous benefits to having access to knowledge beyond what you individually can gather. A natural effect of this is that your experience and thoughts are a tiny speck in the vast pool of all human thought and understanding. This sometimes leads to dismissing subjective experience as irrelevant or unimportant in an objective discussion. While I do not claim that you should never dismiss anyone, as that is a ridiculous standard, focus on objective truth can lead to leaving people behind because they just don't get it. Dropping the effort to make yourself understandable damages relationships. You are not obligated to explain everything to everyone. You are not obligated to maintain every relationship, and there are bad actors which you absolutely shouldn't expend effort on. It's however better to consciously pick your battles rather than stop wherever tiredness or frustration tells you to, and it's better to be slightly too precise than to under-explain and hope people extrapolate the rest correctly. In a personal conversation, it's more important to get your interlocutor to understand than it is for your take to be objectively correct according to the dictionary. The dynamic is different when an audience is involved, as there are many more factors at play than just interpersonal communication. Returning to the point, a vast pool of information is formed from all human works as well as the responses to those works and other information about them. We have a lot of data on what people value, what generates certain responses, how that relates to context, etc. Through seeking patterns in that data, we define common mistakes and best practices, and we also build an understanding of cause and effect. People have wildly differing tastes and interests. It's much easier to form negative rules, as in don't do X, than to positively describe what a work should be to be considered good. Creation requires venturing outside of what has already been understood and established, or else it is considered plagiarism. I think patterns that group of people consider good are exactly where the concept of genres comes from. A genre gathers creators and consumers around shared goals. Those goals start out as shared experience or feeling, and over time, through reflection and discussion, become defined and understood niches with unique rules and domain-specific knowledge. A genre describes a particular kind of good, and all the understanding developed around it serves as an objective framework from which to judge new entries in the genre. Horror fans are interested in a certain kind of experience, and horror creators try different ways of providing that experience. If you try to apply rules for horror to romantic comedies, you would quickly realize that what makes objectively great horror does not transfer well into making a completely different kind of good. There will be elements shared for the particular medium or for stories in general, but the more specific you get, the less in common. Obviously, categorization into genres is not bulletproof. There are works that fit under multiple genres, and some that are so unique they effectively define their own genre. The intent of the creator might be different from how the final product is received. A genre might become so bloated with works that it loses meaning, and subgenres arise to provide more specific descriptions. These problems are a reminder that, ultimately, any understanding we have, any description we form, any words we use are all abstractions over base reality. People create things and consume creations of others. People value different works for different reasons. There are patterns to creation and consumption that can be spotted and named. There are exceptions to the patterns. Each person's perspective can be unique and valuable, but also most individuals are tiny and irrelevant within the sheer scale of humanity past, present, and future. My answer to the question of objectivity versus subjectivity is that the distinction is a tool that can be used in many different ways depending on the particular situation. It may be less satisfying than picking a side, but I think it's far more useful. If I may give any advice, in conversations pay very close attention to what is said and try to spot where you make assumptions. Repeat what you heard in your own words to your interlocutor and ask if it's correct. Look for what's unclear and point a gentle question in that direction. Help the other person get their thoughts across instead of looking for openings to get your own thoughts out. I'd be quite happy to see more people looking for truth together. That's it. Cheers.